Okay, we're ready, Bezalel.
Okay, we got a packed house. Okay, I wanted to start from Ayin Tes. Ayin Tes is the end of the Perek. After a couple of weeks of hard work and going through a very difficult and challenging Perek, so the last 3 or 4 blot give a lot of agadata. So I wanted to pick up. I wanted to do a few. Second. I wanted to do a few choice selections. So let me start off on Ayin Tes. We're right in the middle of the daf. This here. The Gemara is on 79b, right in the middle. And now that we spend, like I said, a couple weeks learning about a Ganaf and a Gazlan and Tashlume Dalad Vehei, Gemara wants to know Shalu Talmidav Es Rab Yochanan ben Zakkai. Okay, so the students of Yochanan ben Zakkai asked him a question. Why is it that the Ganaf gets a more stringent penalty, i.e., he pays kefel? Amar lahen zehish v'kavod eved l'kvod kono, v'zelo hish v'kvod eved l'kvod kono. So the answer of Yochanan ben Zakkai gave was that when it comes to one of them is what we call an equal opportunity offender, right? The Ganaf the Gazlan, for example, says, I'm going to offend everyone. I'm going to offend God. I'm going to offend man. And I have no problem, right? I have no problem, stealing in front of everyone. The Ganaf, on the other hand, differentiates between people and God, right? He says people are worth more, so to speak, right? Are more honorable because I don't want to, right? I'm doing it like Gemara says a lot. The Ganaf does it while no one is there because he's afraid of people. So he doesn't equate the fear of God to the fear of person. So therefore, ironically, we reward the Gazlan with a lesser punishment because he offends everybody. He has no problem offending God and people, right? Equal opportunity. Okay, so that's one statement that the Talmud makes. And it continues and it says, Kiviyachol asa ein shalmata ki'ilu eno roeh, ve'ozen shalmata ki'ilu eno shomas. And he's almost making it like the eye of God who's seeing everything, and the ear, right, as if he's not recording everything. He has no care in the world, right? So therefore, we punish the Ganaf. We make him pay kefel as opposed to the Gazlan who pays only keren. So I just wanted to start off. I saw a very interesting comment by the Iyun Yaakov. The Iyun Yaakov says, if you look at the Gemara's question, it says mipnei ma amru. And he says that usually means that there's something bothering the questionnaire, the one asking the question. Meaning what? He says, Shahare Matzinu, Shahare Mitzad Hasfara Yesh Lahachmer Ba'over Avera Befarhesia, Yoter Mimisha Over Avera Betzina. He says, what's bothering the Gemara is that we usually find that someone gets the more stringent penalty because he's sinning the Farhesi, he's doing it in public, right? More than someone who does it in private. Shaharei Avera Shabein Adam Lamakom Shenatsu Befarhesia Yesh Behen Chilul Hashem Yoter. He says, aren't you forgetting the concept of Chilul Hashem, which is right? Which is being, right, which is desecrating the name of heaven, literally, by doing something in the view of everyone, right? If you do everything and everyone can see you, so that's what we call classic Chilul Hashem. So therefore, it's the opposite. We should be, right? We should be rewarding, right? We shouldn't be rewarding the Goslin. We should be rewarding the Ganav, because at least the Ganav isn't committing Chilul Hashem, as opposed to the Goslin, who will rob you in daylight in front of everyone and has no qualms about it. So that's really, in a sense, what the Gemara is bothered by. So that's why he says, "Ve'alzeh tiretz haGemara shehagazlan hishve kavod eved lekvod kono." He says the point is that the Gazlan equated the kavod eved, right, God's kavod, to the people. He says, even though he's doing it, even though this Gana is doing something, even though this Gazlan is doing something out in the public, well, everyone could see, it's not that much of a Chilul Hashem, because, as the Ian Yaakov says, people will not learn from him. They're not going to say, oh, you know what? I guess it's okay to steal, right? When everyone thinks of a Chilul Hashem, they say, oh, if you're going into a non-kosher restaurant to buy a Diet Coke, just make sure to take off your yarmulke, right? Because we don't want people to think that it's okay for you to go into that restaurant, right? So that's a concept that exists, but that actually makes sense, because people could actually say, oh, look at that, he has a yarmulke, therefore it must be a kosher restaurant. Here, nobody will ever come to the conclusion and say, oh, I guess it's okay to steal, right? So therefore he says that inyan of Chilul Hashem, right, people aren't going to pick up and say, oh, it must be okay, because the Isser of Gezelhu is what he calls a mitzvah sichliyasu. Gezel, right, who gadol tavos nafsho. He says, because this is one of those commandments that just makes sense, right? In order to have a functioning society, right, the prohibition of Gezel is probably in the top 5 in order to have a society that functions well. Okay, so I thought that was a good introduction as to what exactly the Gemara's question and what exactly the Gemara's answer is. Now, I saw also there is a question that the Maharal asks. The Maharal says, hold on a second. It says that what you're doing is you're equating, right? You're basically saying, oh, God is not watching me, right? Or, oh, this person isn't watching me. And he's equating it all. The Maharal asks a very interesting question. He says, and we had this concept before a couple of years ago in one of the classes, the Gemara in Chagiga, it's a Gemara in Moed Katan, says that if someone cannot conquer his Yetzer Hara and made the decision to give in, right? The Gemara says, Yilbash Chorim v'yelech l'makom she'en makirin oso v'yaser ritzon v'al yischal shem shamayim b'farhesia. Someone who absolutely has to give in to his desires, whatever it is. He says, let him wear black, right? There's actually, if you remember, there's I think it's a machlokas, Tosfos and Rush, whether we actually, whether we take this Gemara literally or not, right? If you remember back then. Anyways, so which you really, really can't hold yourself in. So you go to somewhere where no one will know you, right? You dress up in black so no one can see you. Oh, so it sounds from that Gemara that it's not okay, but it's at least better than everyone seeing you. So the Maharal says, I don't understand. It sounds from over there that someone who does it, the farhesia in public, is worse off, right? The sin is much greater. So why over here, Umadua kan hichmiru onsho shel haganav she'osa b'seiter yoter me'onsho shel hagazlan she'osa b'ferhesya. So this is a similar question, meaning why are you telling me that the ganuf, right, who does it b'seiter, right, in secrecy, doesn't the Gemara say that if you could choose to do something, you should rather do it in secrecy? Right? So that's a very interesting question that we ask. So the Maral gives two explanations. He says, Shalagabe Ganaf, Minayin Shalo Timtze Biyado Hagneva, Sharia Kotsuv Omer, Im Himatzet Biyado Hagneva. The Kivin Sheyochola Hagneva Lihimatzet Tzarach Aganav La'alos Bedaito, Sheshem Shamayim Yischal El Yado. So he says, because there's a good chance that the Ganaf will eventually be caught. And when he's caught, yeah, the act, he may not be caught in the act, but when the Torah describes the end game of the Ganaf, it says, he'll be found with it. So then everybody will know that he stole it, and there you have your Chilul Hashem. So that's one explanation the Maral gives. The second explanation is that the Gemara over there says, Shema she'amar she'yelech l'makom she'ein makirin oso. That Gemara in Chagiga, hainu dafka b'mi she'enu yachol hakofes yitzro. That's someone who is at his, right, he just can't hold himself back anymore. He's at his limit. But the average person who is probably not at his limit, right? He is someone that if he did the sin, right? Then his punishment is much worse if he does it beseiter. So it's only referring to someone who absolutely can't hold himself back. But the Maral agrees that if he's, not pressed and is acting, yeah, he obviously is a robber, so he's not that great. But if he is at least a reasonable ganuf, right, so to speak, his punishment is much worse if he does it in secrecy. So I think that's another way the Maharal answers this Gemara. I found another interpretation on this. Well, before we get to that, I saw the Rambam himself in the Moreh Nevuchim actually brings down a couple of other reasons why we punish the ganaf much more than a gazlan. So he gives a couple of reasons here. He says because the damage that results of a geneva is much more common than gezela, right? Because if you think about it, most people, when they opt to steal, they disregard God, but if they could choose, they would rather not get caught by a person. So, this may fly in today, in light of today's news where you see people just shoplifting and, have absolutely no care for anything. But your classic, prowler that goes out at night is more common than someone who just steals in broad daylight. So that's one, that's one distinction, he says. And the second one, he says, is that she'efshar la'adam lihishamer min hagazlan v'lamod kenegdo ma she'ein ken im haganav. He says because it's more likely that a person could defend himself more from a gazlan, right, as opposed to a ganaf. Because you don't see him, and a gazlan, at least you could confront him, right? So that's the second reason why the Rambam says that we punish the ganaf more. Excuse me one second. Excuse me. So that's the Rambam. The term the Gemara uses is osa ozen, right? So when we think of God, we say that God has everything recorded. And when you're recording or using your eyes, that's one thing. But the other expression, it says, "V'ozen shel mala ki'ilu eno shomas," right? The punishment is that this kind of completely, right, disregards the ayin shel mala, right, and also the ozen shel mala. So again, the Maral asks another question. He says, I'm sorry, not the Maral, the Ben Yehoyada. He says, if you think about it, he says, Shalachora kan lo kafir ella be'ain shalmala, ki ilu eino roeh. Uma inyan ozen lakan. What does the ear have to do with it? Meaning, what he's basically saying is that God, right, he's denying that God's watching, meaning he doesn't really care. So therefore, he's going to steal. But what is this term about the ozen? Ozen is for hearing. There's no hearing over here. God is recording, so to speak. So he's watching with the ayin. What does the ozen have to do with anything? So the Ben Yehoyada answers, and he says, "Ube'emes kvar gam be'ayin v'gam." He says, "She'ein ayin roeh es masav ube'ozen shehayir lo lachosh letzakas haganav shetzorek lifnei kodesh baruch hu lasos din im haganav." He says what the ozen is referring to is not necessarily God's ozen. He says that he's actually disregarding two people. He's disregarding God, obviously, and he's also disregarding the fact that he's not just benefiting by taking someone else, he's causing tsar to someone else. And when he's causing tsar to someone else, that person screams out, right? Like the pasuk says, "Im tzaoki tzake elai v'shamati," right? I think that's in Mishpatim. So he says that this person is going to scream out, right? And he says, "I want my day," right? So nimtza shekafar gam bezeh shechashav she'ein ozen shel mala shomat tzakaso shel hanignav. It's almost like he's either denying or disregarding the fact that he's going to have his judgment day when someone's going to be screaming because they're being robbed, and he totally doesn't care. So that's an explanation of the word ozen. The Gemara ends off by saying, and we actually spoke about this concept a lot over the last 2 or 3 years. Anytime the Gemara talks about, for example, when we had Yafet Talmud Torah, im derech eretz, right? Work, right? So the Gemara actually discusses, it says, Gadol, right? It says, Amar Rab Meir, Bore ekama Gadol Korach Shel Malacha. Right? I'm all the way on the bottom of Ayin Tesam is right before the Mishnah, right? The last piece of Agadata, before the Perek changes topics completely, is that now that we discussed the concept of Daled V'Hei for 2 weeks, we want to know why is it that there's a difference between a shor and a seh. So Rav Meir says, take a look at the concept of malacha, right? Never underestimate. Now, it's what I find interesting is that the Baal Memra is Rav Meir. If you remember, and this is actually the last class we had, I think November 7th, the last Mishnah in Kiddushin, okay, before I went dark for a couple of months. Talked about, remember what the last Mishnah in Kiddushin says, Amar of Meir, Meniach, Ani Kol Umana Sheva Olam, Ve'eni Malamed B'nai Elo Torah. It talks about the preferred professions. And Rav Meir says, he says, scrap everything, right? Because Torah conquers all. And here it is that the same Rav Meir says, don't underestimate the power of work. I looked around, I didn't see anybody ask this question. I just realized it myself. That here he is, he's saying, yeah, it's great Torah, but at the end of the day, don't underestimate the concept of malacha. And I just want to give a shout out. I don't think my daughter's listening, but today was my daughter's first day at work after college. So I think it's a nice coincidence that we could celebrate the koach of malacha. That the seh and the shor are two different animals. Rav Meir says, Shor shel bitla mimlachto chamisha, seshelo bitla mimlachto arba. The fact that you stole a shor is much more of a damage because a shor is an animal that you could get a lot of work done from it, as opposed to a seh, which you don't really work in the field. So the pain or the loss that you caused is much greater for the shor as opposed to the seh. And then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai adds another reason as 5-4. Kama gadol kavod habrios, right? How great is the power of kavod habrios, which is what? Which is the fact that shor shahalach baragov chamisha. When you steal a shor, you're not picking the shor up because it weighs 600 pounds. So you actually have to schlep it. But seh sheher kivu al ksefo arba. The seh that you could just pick up is arba. And I actually saw the Torah Tamima makes a comment on this and says, don't forget that we're talking about a ganuf over here. So not only does the Torah care about the well-being or the embarrassment that a ganuf suffers, after all, at the end of the day, no one is watching him. So the Torah Tamima says that is the biggest chiddush of all. You ever hear that one, Shmuel? That he's not only is he stealing it, he's a ganuf, so no one sees it.
Yeah,
and
it's a big chiddush, but
that's even so kal v'chomer we care about it. He's not even.
But what about if the guy
doesn't?
What if he doesn't carry it on his shoulder? Why should he be paying less?
For the seh?
Yeah, let's say he just walks out with it. So why does he get a discount?
Because he wasn't embarrassed. The
So
point
then
is,
he
even
shouldn't
if
get
no
the
one
discount.
sees you, it's humiliating. That's the chiddush.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying, but let's say he doesn't put it on his shoulder. Why should he get the discount?
I don't know. Good question. So, but it's funny because it's only a discount vis-a-vis the 5. It's still double the kefel of any other animal. Because tficha and mechira only apply to shor and seh. So that's
and also the Gemara says why you pay 5 for a shor, but it doesn't say why you pay 4, why you pay a knas of 4 for a sheep.
Right. We just know that it's less, but why? But it's still 4 times more than keren. Right. Good question. Okay, so that's one interesting. Oh, but by the way, just I want to end off on that note. The Marsha I saw has a interesting situation where he says, what about if you took an egel? Meaning the Marsha actually makes a halachic ramification or a halachic nafkamina between these two reasons. Meaning, if you're telling me the point is carrying a shor, a baby shor is an egel, is a calf, right? So what if you stole a calf? Now this calf is young and it doesn't do malacha yet. But according to you, if it has to do with malacha, right, according to one opinion, then it should be 5. But what if it's a shor that doesn't do malacha? So that's why it makes a difference whether it's because of malacha or it's because of kavod habrios. So the Marsha actually has a discussion about that. I just thought that would be interesting. Okay, so let's get to the next selection. Again, there's a lot of, I guess, potpourri in these last 3 dafim on the 7th perek, and this is a favorite of mine. It's on Pei Amud Beis 80b, right around the 5th, right around the 7th or 8th wide line. Gemara says, Rav Acha bar Papa Mishmei Dochinu, Rav Papa says 3 things. Masriyan al hachichuch b'Shabbos. When it comes to chichuch, what's chichuch? Rashi says chichuch is shchin, right? When people are suffering from shchin, you could blow the shofar on Shabbos because it's considered a plague. And you could act on it even on Shabbos when you don't normally blow a shofar. And the second line is Videlas Hanineles lo b'mehera tifatach. The door that's closing or about to close will not open anytime soon. And if you're buying land or a house in Eretz Yisrael, you could write the shtar even on Shabbos. Okay, so it seems like these are three random messages. Okay, so the Gemara has a clarification. We talk about Shchin a little bit, and then the Gemara says, what does this mean that the door that's closing will not open soon? So about 5 lines from the bottom, Mahi Marzutra Amar Smicha. So Marzutra explains that what's going on over here is the concept of smicha. Okay, and Tosfos explains that it's regarding a certain story in Maseches Bava Basra where Mar bar Rav Ashi was in the contention of becoming the Rosh Yeshiva of Masa Machasya, and he had a contender, and something happened, and when Mar bar Rav Ashi went, in order to go be the Rosh Yeshiva, the other person was it was like a race, it was like an election, and Mar bar Rav Ashi detained a few rabbis along the way, and he created a quorum of 10, and he started learning with them, and it was decided at that moment that because he saw an opportunity, he took it and he became the Rosh Yeshiva, and Rav Acha, who was the contender, lost the position. So that's the opinion of Marzutra, that this is referring to smicha. And Rav Ashi, about also 7-8 lines from the bottom, says Rav Ashi Amar Kol Hamarian Lo b'Meherim Mativin Lo. Something that is bad now, right? Something that's on its way down will not be good. Okay. So what is going on over here? So it's like it's a little bit mysterious. What does Shchin have to do with writing a shtar for a house, which has to do with seizing an opportunity? So I want to read the words of the Maratz Chayes. The Maratz Chayes says, let me open it, what the connection is. He says, Sheyesh kesher ben shlosha hadinim hamuchovanim kan. Kitam echad yesh b'kulan. He says, these three statements that look independent really have one common denominator. V'hu lahoros la'adam shekiyesh lo shas kosher le'eza davar. If a person has an opportunity for a specific thing, o inyan, sheyinatzel es oso hasha'a v'lo yavor es oso hazman b'batola. Right? What they call opportunity knocks. Literally, the deles. Right? I wonder if it's related to that. Right? The door that's closing, if there's an opportunity to seize the moment, right? And you have to act right then and there, right? You have to take it. Kachu adelas haninelas. That's the mushal of the door that's closing. Shemuvor kan b'gemara. Sheyarbe ha'adam barachmim kodem shetino hadelas. That you should do whatever you can, including pray, to achieve something before that opportunity flies away. Because when that door is closed, right, the opportunity comes only once. Then sometimes you gotta wait very long for a second opportunity. That is the connection. So now let's go back to these three seemingly independent statements. What's going on over here? There's a plague of boils that started or that's going on Shabbos, and you're actually allowed to blow shofar, shema hashahazot, hishas rachamim v'ratzon. We don't know when God has his ears, so to speak, to us, and has a shas rachamim. So you're going to say, well, I can't do it on Shabbos. We're not, and unfortunately today we know that we say Tehillim now on Shabbos that we don't normally do because of what's going on in the world. So we bend a lot of rules when there are severe situations that call for it. So here too also, the Gemara says that you don't normally blow shofar on Shabbos, but here you bend the rules and you do what you have to do. Because if you wait, you could miss the opportunity of cashing in to get that moment when God is more apt to listen to us. So that's why you could even do it that's why you could do it also on Shabbos. It's just interesting. The word chichuch is actually a Hebrew word today that means friction, right? In like a physics sense. Like if you want to use the word like friction on a carpet or, two forces opposing each other. So the word in Hebrew is actually chichuch. And I think it's interesting because we use the word chichuch. It's not just friction. It's, people against each other. So I found that really also a little, ironic how the Gemara uses the word chichuch, and that's what, unfortunately we're suffering from chichuch. But anyways, putting that aside, so shorish hadin shekosan ala abayis shenikna be'eretz Yisrael. And what does the house have to do with anything? Why are you writing a star on Shabbos? Because afilu b'Shabbos kivin sheish inyan kekniyas bayis be'eretz Yisrael uke'es nisratza oso mochel. What if he woke up on Shabbos morning and said, you know what? I finally agreed to sell you my house in Israel. So you're going to say, well, it's Shabbos, right? We can't write stars. We can't do anything. Let's wait for tonight. So the Gemara says, no, we're going to bend the rules and say, because of the importance of Eretz Yisrael, you could even write the star. Okay, the Gemara says it's talking about Amir al-Nachri. It's not literally writing a star, but still something that we're not ordinarily allowed to do, like appoint a non-Jew as a shliach. We're actually allowed to do this now because, you seize the opportunity. Because you never know when a person is going to change their mind. So therefore, when you see these opportunities coming, you have to act drastically and not hesitate. So I was thinking about this a little bit.
Bezalel.
Yes.
When I was in Israel, when we were in Israel for the year, somebody told me that Rosh Yeshiva of Shalavim plowed the ground on Shabbos in 1967 after they conquered the area. Did you ever hear that?
No.
Where were you? You didn't study there?
I did. I cannot confirm nor deny.
All right.
So, don't know. What I do know is I was thinking very abstractly about this Gemara for a long time because it's one of those lines that you think about, the door closing and opportunity knocks and all these lines that we hear about seizing the moment. And unfortunately, it sounds from this Gemara that when you don't, act spontaneously, then you end up regretting it. Almost like, we didn't go into the whole story in Bava Basra, but that's pretty much what happened. There was like a moment of time when Mar Bar Avashi thought he'd become Rosh Yeshiva, and he actually did something, and he basically, I don't want to say illegally, but he pushed his way. I guess that's the best word. He pushed his way when he saw a sliver of hope. And a lot of times we look back and we regret, not doing something. So I started thinking to myself, it sounds from this Gemara that most of the regrets that we have is from missing these opportunities, meaning looking back at it and say, oh, had I known, or had I have done this, or had I studied harder. So I actually found an article this year. This is, more on the psychological level. This is where, this is one of these Gemaras that really get to me, because I saw an article by a psychology professor. The name of the article it's in Media magazine. It's called "The Best Strategy for Avoiding Regret is Taking a Chance. Science reveals that we regret inaction far more than action." So that's what I was actually thinking about, and I couldn't believe it. A minute later, I found this article about regret. I'll read a little bit about it. Last month, I received a call from my middle child, a college senior, with quite surprising news. He just received an offer from the Peace Corps to spend 27 months working in Peru. My immediate response as a mom, after offering him my congratulations, was to worry. Peru was a very long way from our home in Massachusetts, and given the limited time off for Peace Corps volunteers, he likely wouldn't return home during that entire time. But when he asked me for my advice, I took a deep breath and said, I think if you don't go, you'll regret it. My advice was decidedly not based on my preferences as his mother. Instead, it was based on my knowledge of the psychology of regret. So the article goes into a study that they did as to what says the top 6 regrets people have. Researchers in one study examined the most common types of regrets for American adults. Their finding revealed the following 6 biggest regrets: education, I should have studied harder; career, should have become a dentist; romance, I wish I'd marry him instead of him; parenting, I wish I'd spend more time with the kids; and self-improvement. Research also consistently shows that we experience more regret over things we chose not to do than things we chose to do. That's what I was interested in. What do people regret more? Things that they don't do, or things that they do? So it says in one study, people were asked what they would do differently if they could live life over again. More than half of the regrets had to do with inaction. Should have attended or completed college, should have pursued a particular career, should have tried harder in marriage. In contrast, only 12% were regrets of action. Shouldn't have smoked, shouldn't have gotten married, shouldn't have worked so hard. And the conclusion is it makes sense, because you could always go back. If you're doing something, you could always drop it, right? You can't drop something that you never took, that you never did action on. You could only drop something that you're currently doing. So that's pretty much, a little bit of abstract but again, it comes from this Gemara that really got me thinking as to why we talk about doors closing and, and opportunities flying away. And it's true that the door that closes sometimes, can never open again. So I just, got a little bit of nafama from that article. Okay, we got to do a little bit of everything, right? So now we're going to go
Did you
to
ever read Rabbi Soloveitchik's? Did you ever read Rabbi Soloveitchik's essay called Odido,
a little bit. Why does he discuss that?
where he talks about the beloved is knocking on the door and she
Yes,
hear it,
yes, yes,
and
yes.
she doesn't get up,
Yes,
and
and
she
she
lost
right.
her opportunity.
Meitzitz ben Acharakim, right? She's right. Yeah, yes, yes, yes. I do remember that. Yeah.
She says, I
Okay.
don't want
Very
to get
nice.
up. I already took off my robe. I'm lying down. I went to sleep.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Okay. I heard Rabbi Obam once give a long speech on that a long, long time ago. Okay. So now we're going to, like I said, this parak at the end has a lot of, moving parts. So on Daf Pei Beis, we're going to skip to one of the takanas of Ezra. Okay, Ezra is known for making 10 takanas, and the Gemara on Daf Pei Beis says, about 10 lines from the top of Daf Pei Beis 82a, So the more famous takanas Ezra made was we lane mincha Shabbos, we lane on Mondays and Thursdays. We eat garlic on Friday night. Okay, we do all kinds of things. And the Gemara brings down the concept of why we have to lane every Monday and Thursday, because you don't want to go 3 days. And the Gemara brings a brisa that says, Amdu Neviim Shabineim V'tiknu Lehem Shia Korin B'Shabbos. So this Gemara says literally that the Neviim were mitaken, that we lane on Shabbos, and then we take a break on Sunday, and then we lane on Monday, and then we take a break on Tuesday, Wednesday, and we go back to laning on Thursday, and then Friday we take a break. Because you don't want to go 3 days in a row without Torah. Okay? So the question is, everybody knows that, davening, where does davening come from? But the question is, this institution of Kriyas HaTorah, I just figured I'd spend a few minutes on and just discuss where did it come from. So first of all, there's a Gemara at the end of Megillah. We take it for granted that every year we finish the Torah on Simchas Torah, and every week we read about one parsha. Sometimes we do two. We have to catch up with the calendar. But the truth is, there was an alternate way back a long time ago where they actually took 3 years. It was a 3-year cycle, which has a lot of side problems with it, because the Gemara sometimes wants to know why we lay in certain parshas at a certain time. But if it took 3 years to do it, then it didn't always coincide. Okay, that's a separate point. But in general, where does this come from? The fact that we read the Torah on Shabbos. Okay, so the Rambam in Hilchas Tefillah, chapter 12, says, who is the one who established this? So our Gemara actually uses the word Nevi'im. The Rambam himself uses the word Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, Moshe Rabbeinu tiken lahem liyisrael shiyakorin the Torah b'ravim b'Shabbos v'shenich. It was Moshe that instituted it. Okay, so it sounds like it's a deoraisa. Okay, the Kesef Mishnah has a problem because he says, look at our Gemara, it says Nevi'im. Okay, so maybe it's a combination, because Moshe was the Navi. He was the first Navi. So therefore, it's okay for him to call it that, Moshe was the Navi that instituted. So it doesn't sound like it's a deoraisa completely, because it uses the word takana. The Bach in the Shulchan Aruch actually argues, and he says that Kriyas HaTorah is actually from the Torah. Okay, because it says Moshe tiken leYisrael, and he brings down a Yerushalmi that says Moshe tiken lehem leYisrael. It's a Yerushalmi in Megillah at the end. It says Moshe tiken lehem leYisrael sheyikorin the Torah's b'Shabbos b'yomim tovim u'v'roshei chadashim u'b'cholo shel moed shenema v'aydaber Moshe moadei Hashem el b'nei Yisrael. Meaning Moshe, right? The pasuk in Emor says that Moshe would tell us over the laws of the Moadim to the Jewish people. Uma'acher, the Yerushalmi says, Uma'acher shedarshu zos me'akasav harei midoraisa. So it sounds like if the Yerushalmi is using a pasuk from Emor to teach us that Moshe instituted this, it sounds like the foundation of this is on a doraisa level. But that's only one opinion. That's only the opinion of the Bach. Most of the Rishonim do not really say it is a deoraisa. That pasuk is more like an asmachta. Okay, so there's a discussion about that, where exactly it comes from. And then I saw a very interesting question. We have a concept the Mishnah talks about in Rosh Hashanah that you can't blow the shofar, you might carry it, you can't have Purim. Right, if Purim is on Shabbos, you don't lay the Megillah Esther on Shabbos. And the Gemara says the reason is because Shema Yavarenu Arba Amos Pershus Arabim. So the Tosfos Yontif actually asked this question in the Mishnah in Megillah. It says, I don't understand. Why do we have a problem with reading a Megillah on Shabbos? Because maybe you're going to carry it. Why do we lane on Shabbos? Right? Now, one of the answers is why do we lane on Shabbos to this question is because the Taz is famous for saying that if something is written in the Torah, assuming you hold that laning on Shabbos as a D'oraisa, then obviously you have to lane it. And you can't say, oh, we're going to do away with that rule because maybe you're going to carry it in a place where there's no Eruv. That doesn't make sense. Just like it doesn't make sense for us to say, let's do away with blowing shofar
But
even on Wednesday because maybe, right, you're going to carry it, right? So
where does it say it's a dioraisa to lane on Shabbos?
I'm just saying, according to the Bach brings down, like I said earlier, the Bach brings down a Yerushalmi at the end of Megillah that quotes a pasuk of Vaydaber Moshe Mojdei Hashem b'nei Yisrael to teach us that Moshe actually made this takana of laning on Shabbos. So it sounds like it's a da'oraisa. So that's,
I
one of
see.
the
So you're saying a takana of Moshe is a dioraisa or a
yes.
takana?
So it's not so clear because the people who say that it's a derabanan say that's what the word takana means. The word takana
That's what I was thinking.
Means a derabanan. So,
but it's a takana of Moshe.
Correct. It's like a hybrid. It's somewhere in the middle. But the Tosas Yontif actually answers the question and says because the difference between the Torah and the Megillah is because when it comes to the Torah, you have to review it many times, and it says that you could only lane if you're a bucky, right? He quotes the Orach Chaim. He says, "Im ken kol hakorin b'Torah b'kiyim," right? If you're a bucky and you're in charge of laning, then you're not going to have a problem and have to ask a chacham a shaila, as opposed to Megillas Esther, which, right, we're not b'kiyim in. So that's why we're more prone to carry it Arba Amos when it comes to a Megillah as opposed to a Sefer Torah. I thought you'd like that, Shmuel. Anyways, that is the opinion of the Tosas Yontif. So just to end off, the last daf Pei Gimel, has a discussion. Let me just open it up. I think this is today's daf Pei Gimel, right? Gemara talks about Chachma Yavanis. All right, we're not going to talk about what that means. There's a whole major discussion. Is it Greek philosophy? Is it Greek language? Is it the way people gesticulated when they spoke to each other? It's the whole discussion what exactly Chachma Yavanis means. But whatever it is, the Gemara says it's usher. The Gemara brings down on the top of 83a. It says, Amar Shmuel Mishum Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, Einai Olo Lala Nafshi Mikol Benos Iri. Elif Yeladim Hayu Bebeis Abba, Chamesh Mos Mehem Lamdu Torah, Chamesh Mod Lamdu Chachma Yavanis. Right? Some learn Torah, some learn Chachma Yavanis, which should be illegal. But Vlo Nishtayir Mehen Ela Ani Kan Uben Achi Abba Ba'asya. Okay, so we see the Gemara says that it sounds like it was permitted, this Greek wisdom. So the Gemara answers, Shani Beis Rabban Gamliel Shahayu Krovin L'Malchus. Oh, the Gemara says, well, we're going to make an exception because when it comes to the Krovin, when it comes to the house of Rabban Gamliel, because they were in politics and in upper society, they were what we called Korav L'Malchus. They were in the political scene. Okay, Tanya Hamasaper Kumi Hareza Medake Amori. If someone gets a certain type of haircut, right? Basically, it's either a mohawk or a ponytail or some kind of weird, off the beaten haircut that doesn't conform to what most Jewish people have, right? That's called Darke Amori, or as we call Chukos Hagoy. Okay? Then the Gemara says, but Avtolmus Baruvain, Hitirilo Lasaper Kumi Shahaya Karvel Machas. There was one exception by the name of Avtolmus. The Gemara in Me'ila Daf Yud Zayin has a story about him where he saved the day because he was a politician and there were a lot of gzeros going on, and he was able to get into the government and save the Jews. And the way he did it was he had to show that he was one like them. And to blend in, he broke the rules. He had a certain kind of a haircut that was prohibited. Gemara says, and then it says, okay, and that follows through with a discussion of Chachma Yavanis, which was permitted because of the rule of you could do it if you're in politics and you need to buddy up with the king at the time. So I just wanted to discuss this for the last 10 or so minutes because it's a well-known concept, this concept of Chukas HaGoyim. Question is, where does it come from? Which pasuk does it come from? So there's a pasuk that says as following. It is actually at the end of Achrei Mos. The pasuk says, let me open it up. It says, Kamase Eretz Mitzrayim, Ukamase Eretz Canaan lo tasu, Ubechukosechem lo selechu. Right? This is what we call Maaseh Goy, right? Don't copy the Gentiles. Okay. So I just want to read to you what the Medrash says about this. A very fascinating Medrash. Kamase Eretz Mitzrayim. I'm reading from the Sifra in Achrei Mos. It says, Kamaisei Eretz Mitzrayim, Ukamaisei Eretz Canaan. We read this, by the way, on Mincha of Yom Kippur. Why we read it then is many reasons given. We spoke about it a couple of years ago also in one of the classes. Kamaisei Eretz Mitzrayim, Ukamaisei Eretz Canaan lo tasu, Yachol lo yavinu. Lochalo yibnu binyanim v'lo yitu netiyos kamosam. So the Medrash says, what does it mean you can't copy or you can't do like what they did in Mitzrayim and Canaan? So maybe it means you can't build buildings like they did, or you can't plant like they did. We're not talking about mundane things that they did like everyone else in the world did. It's talking about their specific statutes. Lo amarti ela bechukim hachakukim lahen ulavasehem ulavos avosehem. It's only those things that they instituted for themselves, that they have a Masorah from their fathers and from their fathers' fathers and from all the generations. What are some of those things that they did in Mitzrayim and in Canaan? Uma haya osin, ha'ish nose le'ish, a man would marry a man, the ha'isha le'isha, and a woman would marry a woman, ha'ish nose isha ubita, a man would marry a woman together with that woman's daughter, the ha'isha niset lishnayim, and a woman would be married to two men. That's why the pasuk says, "Do not follow in their ways." So obviously, it's referring to Gilu Arayos. I just found it interesting that out of the 4 prohibitions, Shmuel, you like this. Half of them we do today, so it's not so far off, right? Man marrying a man, a woman marrying a woman, Isha Ubita, and a woman having 2 husbands. Okay, there's actually a discussion. Maybe we'll do it some other time about the prohibition of Isha Le'isha. There's a Rambam, but we're not going to touch that right now. Anyways, so this is the source of what we call. So what's interesting is that if you go throughout Shas, you'll see that they don't apply this to a lot of things. meaning you would think that there are so many examples of not acting like a non-Jew, but the Gemara limits it to very, very few places. So I want to read just a couple of places. One is a Gemara in Chulin, where it talks about someone who wants to clean out his yard, right? Someone who does shchita, and he wants to clean out his yard of the blood. So he has to dig a little bit. He creates a ditch, and he shechs into the ditch on an angle, right? And if you angle it, so you'll have the blood spill out. But that's if you're doing it in your private home. But the Gemara says, b'shuk lo yasaken, but you can't do that in the marketplace. If you shech, you can't shech and let the blood drain out on an incline. Why? So that's a very strange application, one that you would never think of. Another application that you would never think of also is from a Gemara in Tamid, where it talks about how they would tie the Tamid Shel Shachar, right? Like, the Akedas Yitzchak, right? The binding, right? So it says that they wouldn't tie the clay with its hands together with the feet, right? So Rav Huna Rav Chis, the Chad Amar Mishum Bizyon Kodshim, the Chad Amar Mishum the Mahalech B'chukei Ha'amim. He says you don't tie the two arms to the two legs together because that's called Chukei Hagoyim. So there's a very interesting Gemara in Sanhedrin that I just want to end off by saying. It says, well, here's a third example of Chukas Hagoy. Again, something that you would never think of. The Mishnah talks about the capital punishment of hereg. We know there's skilus, reifa, hereg, and chenek. So what's hereg? Hereg are people who are beheaded. Okay? So the Mishnah says that they would cut off their head, right, with a sword. It says, Kederach shehamalchus osa. Rabbi Yehuda omer nivel hulo. Rabbi Yehuda says, nah, that's not a good way to die. El menichen es rosho al sadin v'kofetz, kotetz v'kupitz. So they say, no, what you do is you put your head down and they take a cleaver and they chop you from the back. So the Mishnah says, what are you, nuts? That's the worst. So what's this machlokas about? So the Gemara says, I'm in Sanhedrin Daf Nun Beis. Amar lehen Rabbi Yehuda lachachamim. Afani yodeh shemisa min avelas. He aval ma'aseh shari amar Torah b'chukasem la'salechu. Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree that chopping their head off from the back with a cleaver is not a beautiful way to die, but I have no other choice because every other way is prohibited because of u'b'chosechem lo selechu. So what do the Rabbanan in the Mishnah say? No. Rabbanan say, no, you don't apply that over here because, and this is the punchline, anything that's written in the Torah, okay, if it's a Torah law and the Goyim happen to have a minhag of doing it, then we don't really care about them. And the Gemara proves it by saying something similar, right? Which says that when a Jewish king would die, the custom was that we burn all of their possessions. We don't want anybody taking any of their possessions that belong to the king, so we burn them all. And the Gemara says, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah talks about it, V'lo midarkei amori. So we say, Hechi sarfinan, but how could you do this? The Gemara says, the Goyim also do it. So the Gemara answers, Elakivan dechsiv sreifa ba'oraisa. However, because since we have a custom of doing it, because there's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu that actually says, "Ubemisrafos avosecha, lav minayu kagamrin and hachinami kivin dechsiv sayid ba'oraisa lav minayu kagamrin." We don't learn it from the Goyim, even if they coincidentally have that same law. We can't say, "Oh, we're not doing it." So that's a very, very important rule about when to apply ubechokosechem lo selechu. And just a couple of words on what on how we apply it today. So the Shulchan Aruch actually talks about this and says, "Ein hochem b'chukos havdei kochavim." Right? We don't follow them. We don't imitate them. V'lo yilbash malbush, I'm reading from the Shulchan Aruch Yoredeya 178. V'lo yilbash malbush hamyuchad lahem, and we don't wear their kind of clothing that they wear specifically. V'lo yigadol tzitzis rosho, okay, we don't have their hairstyle, we don't have dreadlocks, right? Like they have it, and we don't shave our sideburns off and have mohawks and have all these, weird looking haircuts. And Shulchan Aruch goes on and on and on, and that's good. There's a very, very important Ramah that I just want to end with. The Ramah saves us because he says, he says this only applies, says the Ramah, if they're doing something for pritzas, meaning we know one of the forbidden colors for Jewish women to wear is red. It's a color that people are attracted to. So, right? That's something that they. So that's something that we don't want to copy them, right? But it's only if it's for bad purposes, like wearing red. But if they have a practice of something positive, what's an example? Says the Ramah. Today we call this scrubs, right? People wear scrubs all the time. You're going to say, what are you talking about? I see non-Jews wearing it also. Or what about white coats that doctors wear, right? Non-Jewish doctors wear. Why do we copy them? Well, the answer is because if it's something that makes sense and it's customary for a expert rofeh or a professional, right, to wear, that he wears it for his or her profession, or because it brings kavod to you. So that's something good. So there's a lot of discussion, obviously, where this goes, but I just wanted to end on that, comment how, you have to use your head and say, well, is there an inherent problem with copying them? Yeah, if it's something for negative, but if it's for a positive purpose, then it's okay. And the Yoredeya also brings in Sif Beis, Mishu Karv L'Machlos V'tzarach L'Lbosh B'Malbushehem L'Damos Lahem Mutar Bakol. You could basically break the rule when it comes to working in the political world. And if you need to buddy up with the non-Jewish authorities, then all bets are off, and that's permitted. Okay, 9:00. Questions? No.